You ever have one of those parts of the house that, well, you don't like people seeing because it doesn't look all that great? Well, today, you get to see that. And that is the cover to our crawl space. Yes, this is really how it looks. I got a piece of wood held up by an old piece of fence and a tire and some metal there. And that's to keep our animals out. We have one cat there, a dog there, and I'm not sure where the third cat is, but that's what we have. And you might remember this old project covering up our HVAC, little fence. It has definitely grayed with age, but still looks good. The plan is to use some pressure treated wood to frame out the doorway and then use some cedar pickets to make it look pretty. Couple things to remember if you're gonna use pressure treated wood, especially for a project like this, is this right here is going to be very, very wet from the store, and you need to let it sit out and kind of acclimate to your area. This has actually been sitting in my building for several months as there's cobwebs and dust all over it from everything else I do. And depending on the size of your opening for your crawl space, you might need to determine exactly how big or small your piece of wood will be. This right here is a 2x6 and should do well on mine, but you might need larger or smaller. And to attach the wood to the concrete, I am going to use these concrete anchors. These have been used in the past, but they still have good thread on them, so that's what I'm going to use. But before I can start building, I got to get all that stuff out of the way so I can take some measurements. Now this is a pretty good size hole, so this will be a very large door. And I have a little visitor here. Hi. First thing I want to do is get a measurement across this bottom because that's where I want to stick the first board. We're at 31 7/8. Now my boards are only 5 1/4, which means it won't go all the way across, but that'll be okay because it'll leave a little air gap for these holes as well. Now if we look close at these corners, you'll notice that they're not exactly squared off. Apparently the mortar squeezed out when this house is being built, so either we're going to have to grind this away or cut the wood to fit. Well, I really don't want to grind it away, so I think we'll just have to notch out the wood. Here's a board I cut down, and if you notice here on the ends, I actually cut a 45-degree angle. I did leave a little flat spot right there for strength, but this will hopefully fit around that mortar and allow it to sit flat. I know that I'll leave a little gap here, but I can always fill that in with foam or silicone. Oh yeah, perfect fit. Now I just need to do some measurements. Probably push this back a little bit so we can see it. So I can drill a couple screws through the board into these blocks down here, just so it doesn't move if it ever gets kicked. And once that bottom one's in place, the next step would actually be to make one for the top, but there already appears to be one here, and it is secure enough, so we'll just utilize it. For the side pieces, I did the same concept, just measured it out. I did have to notch it right here because I have a drain line from our dehumidifier that runs under our crawl space. And I didn't want to hit it, so I notched it out. But otherwise, it should be pretty simple just to drill the holes and screw them in. One more thing to remember, if you're drilling into concrete, you need a carbide tip bit and a hammer drill. Otherwise, you could burn up your bit and possibly or even your drill. With the outer frame now complete, we need to start working on the door. As mentioned before, I'm going to be using cedar fence pickets for the door. Now, these have been drying out in my building for a few months, so they're kind of acclimated to the current temperature and humidity. A lot of times, these are like pressure treated wood from the store. They're usually really wet, and if you don't give them some time to dry, they will shrink quite a bit. I also really like how they're trimmed from the factory, how they're just a little dog ear that have been cut off. That's really neat. I'm going to incorporate that, and so I need to trim down about 41 inches. I laid the pickets out side by side, and I believe I'm going to take the cutoffs and attach 2 of them right here in the front, and it'll look like an old-fashioned gate. To hold all this together, I'm going to use some construction adhesive because I already have it on hand, and while that dries, I'm just going to attach it with some screws. And now with all those screws inside, I can flip it over and do something similar to the other side. But since this will be the inside of the door, I got to be careful and make sure wherever my supports are, they won't interfere with the frame. And after some careful measurements, I have all the boards installed, but this one is a little different. It's actually about 1 inch from the bottom, and that way this can actually help out once the hinges are in place. The bottom of this board will actually rest on the frame. So since this door is going to be closed most of the time, I didn't want the hinges to start being stressed too much. And this will help just everything stay in alignment. And the door hinges I chose are nothing fancy. These are actually used off of some other doors. You can see some paint right there on the edges. But I'll just have to make sure these stay nice and oiled so they don't rust up. I decided to give this gate a couple days to let the glue start to cure because it's been raining a lot in our area and I didn't want that moisture to weaken that connection. But if you're gonna build something like this, that's totally up to you. Now let's give this a quick test fit. There we go, almost perfect. Let's get some hinges. It's now time to install the hinges, but I wanted to remind you, when I installed the wood, I did it flush with the concrete. And therefore, normally you need a little extra room for your hinges right here to stick out. So instead of it creating a little extra tension because it's rubbing on the concrete, I'm feeling on the outside of our hinge here, and one side is a little bit larger than the other. So that side's gonna go against the concrete, so that way it doesn't interfere with it opening and closing. Finally got the hinges installed, so let's give this a test fit. It was close. Appears to be hitting somewhere down here, so we're gonna have to go inside and check it out. Looking at the door from the inside, let's look at the top. It appears that this side is sitting a little bit higher than this side. You can see more light in that gap than that one. If we look down at the bottom, it's kind of hard to tell, but it looks like this side is sitting higher than this side. Let's see if we can pull it together. Yep, there you go, it's bumping right there. I have a feeling if I play with these hinges just a little bit, I might be able to get just enough gap to make it work. And this is my buddy here watching me do all this work. Her name is Patches, and you could probably look at her and see why we called her that. I ended up having to do a little bit of sanding on the bottom of this board, but now it fits nice and tight. Now for the hinge, I'm gonna try and use something a little bit simple here. This right here is just a corner bracket that I'm going to attach right here on the inside of the frame. And then I'm going to drill maybe a couple holes through the door, just enough so that it'll fit through. Hopefully deep enough that I can just put a nail through that. Now that I have the little bracket installed on the frame, to get the hole in the door, all I need to do is, now there's a little dent on the door. And now with the slot cut in, just give it a good push. The bracket should protrude. My little lock is gonna be just an old nail that I bent the top on, and that slides right in place. I can push it to the side and hold it nice and tight. And there is my awesome looking crawl space door. Let me close it for you one more time. Push it in, put the nail in. Sometimes it's a little difficult with one hand. That's good because it means it's tight against the house. And there we go. Hope you enjoyed this video.